Welcome back to another episode of Detonation, where we are busy putting death out of business. It's Ben Zion 2020, the transhumanist candidate, presidential primary winner, and it's former presidential primary candidate, now Rundown Live talk host and entrepreneur, radio star. What do you like, Harris?
I'll take whatever you give me. You're too kind, Steele. Thanks for having me on again. It's been a while. Last time I joined you, it was probably almost a month ago or almost 2 months ago. But yeah, I've been busy doing interviews and talk radio nonstop. Things have been going good. And the Rundown Live is the program I've been focusing on. But we've been doing a lot of tech talk. Obviously, that's not the focus of my show, but we do cover the headlines, and usually we try to stay ahead of everyone else. So that means futurism, politics. Sometimes it's watching the police and police watching, police, law enforcement, corruption, all that kind of stuff we cover. Artificial intelligence is just one of the many things. So.
Yeah. I do watch the Rundown Live to keep up with everything. You guys do a good job, and you have that conservative bent, which is interesting as well. It's good to get other perspectives sometimes. So it's good. Well, we're going to ask you because you are the man up. We talk a lot here. It's more of a policy talk show. We talk more generally, more broad about tech policy, geopolitical questions. You're the man on the ground, running around, keeping up with the daily headlines, which is really good actually, because this is something I want to do more often, but it's very hard to keep up with that side of things, especially with this show format. But that's really good. All right, so let's just say hi to Ben. But Ben, how are you? How's your campaign going?
It's going really well, Steele. Thank you. It's good to be. It's good to have the gang back together here, and I'm looking forward to this show. And speaking of the old gang, Poe's having a rough night, my dog. So I'm going to have him say hello. Come here, Poe. There's tomorrow. We know is Veterans Day. We have some good content coming out for tomorrow. And our Arlington speech at Arlington National Cemetery, talking about honoring those folks, and also about the struggle for life extension in our civilization. That's coming out tomorrow. But because of this difficulty with some folks honoring one another, Poe heard some explosions, and he was a little bit frightened. How you feeling, Poe? Feeling a little better now? So everybody keeps asking me, where's Poe? Let's see Poe again. So here he is saying hello. But yes, we've had a great couple of weeks on the campaign trail. A lot of incredible events, a lot of wonderful things going on, and a lot more content and events to come in coming weeks. So I'm pleased to be sharing that. Even today, exciting developments with the United States Transhumanist-Party. And with these initiatives for the Futurist New Deal for America, I'm looking forward to discussing some of that with you today as well.
Fantastic, yes. And your mic's going a little bit there, Ben, if you can. Anyway, well, cool. So, Chris Don, you're the man with the news. What's first up? Artificial retina that can help restore sight to the blind, i.e., Jesus, he's coming back. What's he doing? Why is Jesus landing in America or wherever?
Well, first of all, before we get into the news real quick, I wanted to say, it was neat to see Ben. He was like on a little adventure. He had a little entourage, and they were walking around, going out, checking all these cool things. I even think he had his own theme music following him around, people playing drums and guitar. I'm Ben Zion, Where did you all go, Ben? I wanted to slow down for a second. Like, I saw you were in D.C., right?
Yeah.
What were you doing in D.C.?
So we went to an NIH event on brain-computer interfaces. We got
what was that? Man. Did you get?
So that was Dr. Miguel Nicolelis and a few other folks talking about the current state of brain-computer interfaces using EEG technology. I got to ask him some questions about the sort of upgrading question that we have as a recurring theme on. In the course of our campaign, and he was a little bit pessimistic. He was a little bit techno-skeptical maybe on the subject, but but that's a guy who's at the cutting edge of this sort of thing, and certainly doing some incredible work in getting otherly abled people to really have their upgraded sort of experience. And it was an honor. It's an honor to be able to sit down and talk to some of these guys. I had this similar experience in a few other locations, including getting to ask a question of Andrew Yang and talk to him a little bit after, and that was really nice as well. So a lot of great events going on there, and also this was actually a 5-state tour. We were in Washington and Maryland a little bit, in Pennsylvania, in New York, and then in San Francisco for the Foresight Institute Vision Weekend, which was incredible. Really met a great meeting of the minds there, and I was honored to sit at their feet and take some of that in and get to interact.
Groveling.
Yeah, groveling. Yeah.
Joking. It just sounded, it was a weird metaphor, man. I had to tease you. That's really
sure.
interesting. So it's pretty cool to see what you're doing, and I'm really proud of you. Out of all the people that ran in the primary, I think, honestly, you worked the hardest, and I think you stepped out of your comfort zone on every occasion, and I don't think you knew what to do with yourself half the time. And it was pretty, and that's the way it is. That's what you got to do. You got to reach out to all these different individuals. So, hey, that's really cool, and kudos to you. And, the other thing I wanted to mention is, so when you were sitting down and talking to these people, did they all hook you up into like a brain, like Hive collective interface where you guys could all share your thoughts, or no?
We're getting there. We're getting there.
That's where it's coming.
Everybody, half of these guys at Foresight are pretty well on board with that sort of thing, and I'm one of them. But you have to wait and see. Yeah.
It's Demolition Man, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that we're talking about this, because this is a serious consideration for the USTP moving forward, is how we use these brain-computer interfaces in the best kind of way, how we might contribute to civilizational shifts that would improve our society, but also, I'm sure plenty of people in your community have reservations about this, and we want to see that those fears and concerns are addressed in a reasonable way as well.
Very good. Hey, can I ask you guys both a question? Do you think a lot of the people who are really doing research on all this technology feel like Einstein and the guys who worked on the Manhattan Project felt? They're like, well, this is a bomb, and it could blow the whole stuff up, or it could prevent some people from blowing this up, because some of this technology.
I have become but death, the destroyer of worlds.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I mean,
I'm saying it's right. Isn't that the same thing that's going on right now, though? Like
I just watched a show called Unnatural Selection on Netflix, which features some friends of ours, David Ishii, Josiah Zahner, Jennifer Doudna, of course, an incredible visionary in this field of the ability to edit in the life sciences, CRISPR particularly, I know for a fact that some of these individuals that I mentioned have expressed this very sentiment. I am destroyer of worlds, and that is, I imagine, a terrifying feeling for people in this position. It's a terrifying feeling for any of us staring down the barrel of that. But it's where we are, and we have to find ways to navigate that. And I'm hopeful that we will. The very things that make this world difficult for us to navigate, I think some of those things also will allow us to survive in the course of this coming century. Namely,
I'm not particularly worried about it, because we've got Detonation, we've got Kriston Harris, we've got Ben Zion, we've got Gennady, we've got an emerging team of people who are ready to rock the ethics debate. And I think if we work hard enough, we can overcome these sorts of problems. It's just a really big challenge, and I love really big challenges, and I'm ready to front up and face this world. I think it's a great challenge. I think it's the challenge that falls to our time, but I don't think it's too big. I think we've faced equally as bigger challenges before in our history. I think we can overcome it, and we can do it. You know, the only tricky
It's very
part is really the military-industrial complex and the stuff behind the walls, the anti-democratic stuff, and whether that be a totalitarian regime or, you know, bureaucratic mess. That's the really two hard ones to get at. The rest is not too hard because there's economic, social, political, and other policy mechanisms that you can implement. And it's about talking to the right people, having the right debates, getting into the right corridors of power, and influencing the scene. Now, behind the scenes, behind the military-industrial complex and behind totalitarian regimes, whether that be North Korea, China, Russia, for example, that's a harder problem. That is not impossible, and Trump proved that with North Korea. Everyone was terrified of this tiny little no-bit tin pot country called North Korea, which may or may not have had nuclear weapons or 8 nuclear bombs, which, you know, couldn't even reach the Sea of Japan. They're right next door. And then, you know, everyone's fretting. And then what does Trump do? He comes into office and he knocks the whole thing out in 1 second. You know, so you know, individuals can change the world. You know, whether you like it or not, Trump's done a lot on that front. He's also done a lot of damage. But there are options open, and this is the challenge that befalls us, befalls the generation, and it's a challenge to be embraced. And I'm ready to embrace it. You're ready to embrace it, and I think the USTP, we are building that infrastructure, and that's why I'm so excited about the USTP. That's why I'm excited about Benzion 2020. That's why I'm excited about all the guests and all the people who join us here at Dead Nation, because this is the challenge, and we're ready to face it. We're ready to rock it.
Yeah, man, that's kind of the way it goes. It's funny that you mentioned that, and it's really refreshing because you kind of paraphrase something I always say on my show, and it has more of a religious context to it. But, you know, throughout life, you see... what was that? My statement in my program is that, you know, these days there's over 100 million Bible-fearing Christians in the United States, but there's not an ounce of power between them to change the world environment around them. And here you see in these philosophical books, whether it's the Bible or other organizations, God used one person here, 2 people there to change the world. If you believe in a deity, or, you know, 2 people or 1 person here or there can change the world. And I believe you're absolutely correct. We just have to know what the rules in the game that they're playing, and the game that they're playing by to build this system is called UN Agenda 21. I think it's something that is a blueprint for surveillance. It's the blueprint for a lot of the great technologies that we'll take advantage of, but at the same time, it has that duality of danger and fright and surveillance and nonstop abuse or potential for abuse. So, you know, having these conversations about, for example, right, we were talking about these robots, these sex dolls, sex robots, right, in the news in a Daily Star. Sex robot factory looks like Westworld after producing hyper-realistic dolls. How long will it be till, yeah, it's nice. First of all, I want to say I'd love to have a beautiful doll that makes my bed, a robot that makes my bed, can cook me dinner, back massages. Sounds great, but where's the human interaction here? What are we losing when we're not having human touch and human affection and these things? At the same time, are these things spying on us? Could they? There's an article that came out just recently that said that that robots will have a tendency to want to kill you or cause you harm. That you
it's like Christina.
Well,
it's like the spying through the microwave thing. Did you remember that when she said you can?
Yeah, William me? You know, or who was it that was warning us about that? Yeah, that the refrigerators spy on you, and that's what happened. You know, everyone's like, nah, but you know, I think it's a great thing. I think robots. I know I'm not trying to make this a negative thing, by the way. I'm just trying to say there's 2 sides to things, and I think it would be really cool. And for, let's say, my grandparents who need a robot, maybe they can't get around easily. It has some great features and great benefits. And people maybe who don't have the opportunity to find a significant other that, you know, portrayed certain features, they can order one out.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a lot of people out there. But the question is, what are the side effects? Are we going to have depression because of these dolls dying? Or what's going to happen when you get older and these dolls stay the same age? Are there going to be updates? Are there going to be upgrades? It's just... So that's just one topic we're getting into right now.
Yeah. And then there's the other side of that, which is the sort of bionic man.
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
the robots.
I'd like to go back to the sociopolitics of this in the near term for a second, because I don't think we should concern ourselves too much with this effect of people having some otherworldly interactions or being this idea that all of these people who are lonely are going to be worse off with robots than they are being alone. It doesn't. This is definitely something that will improve what they're experiencing. But what you said, Kristan, about how people might become a little disengaged from the normative set of interactions. That's already something that we do see today in our networked world because of sort of preliminary effects of this kind. And I expect that some of that will continue. And that's the sort of thing that we have to be concerned about.
One thing I do worry about with sex dolls and this sort of thing is the Turing test, right? So if you're a super smart AI and you can infiltrate into one of these dolls, if you can manufacture yourself into one of these dolls somehow, then you can easily manipulate the human subject on the other side of that to break out onto the internet. And you could do that a million times over, depending on how many people, even if you're a lower AI and you know that you want to upgrade and you need that human interaction to upgrade, that's a perfect play right there to stimulate yourself with higher emotional intelligence. So that is a concern for me, whether or not these dolls should be part of the Internet of Things or something like that, which they're definitely going to be a part of, as if you're not going to have one of your dolls and not want it to be hooked to the Internet. But, then you've got that sort of emotional AI problem right there, the Turing test component. When's the point that robot goes from being a programmed entity to an actual person because of outside influence or an outside play?
That's a distant point. I think. What we're going to see is chatbots that are able to that are very attuned to human emotions and very empathic and very good at their jobs, but they're not going to then quickly become something that has agency and has a mind of its own. That's a science fiction film trope. That doesn't have very much to do with the state of advanced algorithms today.
You know who you should talk to that about? You should talk about that with Tom Ross, US 6 series right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a consideration in the longer term, but I'm hard pressed to imagine that it's going to be something that we're really going to have to deal with. But we're going to have to deal with manipulation of other kinds. Sort of Cambridge Analytica on acid kind of effects with having these kind of chatbots in great number in our world. But to imagine that they're going to be autonomous entities with minds of their own, it's far more likely that they'll give us that impression, but they're being manipulated by third parties in the near term.
What do you say, Kristan? What about what did you think in general about the U.S. election and Russia hacking and the Russian bot scandal and all that? What do you say on that whole episode?
It's all fake. Everything's fake. Steele, there's nothing. I mean, everything's fake. It's just the way it is. The Russiagate was fake. The elections that we've had in the past, Bernie Sanders was defrauded by Hillary Clinton. It was fake. Ron Paul was defrauded by Romney in 2012. It was fake. Everything is fake. It's all fake. The news is fake for the most part, and we don't even know what's true anymore. And that was the whole goal of propaganda on Operation Mockingbird, which started in the 60s. And they said that when the general public doesn't know what the truth is anymore, then they know that they've completed their task at hand. They have whole structures dedicated to putting out fake shill accounts and fake Facebook accounts and arguing fake viewpoints of society. RT reported on that recently. It's just all fake. The whole Russian collusion thing, the whole impeachment thing. You had a president that used a female like a humidor, but you have a president here who has a few conversations with somebody in Ukraine, and I don't know. I think it's basically everyone's salty because the big mobsters on the left couldn't beat the little Donald Trump, the movie star. And this is just retaliation. I started realizing, that a lot of this stuff, you just can't put any credence into it. And that's why I like about tech. Tech, for the most part, is pretty absolute, with the exception of when you add the ingredients of government and greed and money and things like that. That's why I enjoy talking about a lot of these things and bringing awareness. But I think it's fake. And I think, again, when you're talking about AI and these robots and everything else, people are going to get addicted. I recently read an article. China is mandating that children who are minors under 18 have a curfew when they have to stop playing video games. People.
One sec on that story. Hold that story right there. Ben Zion, Ministry of Truth. What do you say?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in what Kristan just said.
Hold that story right there. We'll go back to that story, Kristan. But yeah, Ministry of Truth.
So we're talking about. Are we talking about China's domestic policies?
No. So what do you say to the Russiagate scandal? What do you say? Do you think the media is fake? Do you think it's a game? Do you think that there's propaganda? Do you reckon George Orwell's 1984 is real in America, real and alive?
Yeah, that's what he said is true enough. It's particularly something that people in third-party organizations like all of us do have to concern ourselves with, because there is this two-party system, and the voter has largely been removed from the equation in having a say in what goes on. This is a corporatist kind of structure that and so we have these two parties there engaging in sort of sports fandom on the consumer level, on the voter level, and very little actual policy initiatives are being described. This is why I've interviewed guys like Max Kay. Why I've interviewed Max Kay is the founder of the Flux Australia organization. He wants to superimpose this digitalization voting system over the existing political infrastructure there. It's not basically a post-political policy organization. It's why, of course, we've talked so much to our friends in Estonia, like the e-governance emissary that we've done some interviews with, and because we have a real problem in this country. We do not have full voter participation. We do not have anything close to that, and that has created all manner of effects like that Kristan has described. And we need to just aim a little bit higher. And as he said, the tech is a pretty good way to start to address some of those concerns.
Kristan, sorry, I cut you off. Run to that story in China. What happened?
Oh, no, we'll get there. I have to mention, though, that's why you see people like Julian Assange in jail and people like Edward Snowden not being able to come into the United States. I always thought it would be treasonous to see the government commit corruption and not say anything. But if you do say something, you have to leave and go to Russia. I think that's as far as Russiagate goes. So, as far as stories, people are going to get addicted to these things. Technology is going to become addicting. It's already addicting. But to a point where China is regulating their children not to play video games, past 10 p.m. And first of all, as an American, I find it disgusting that the government would tell parents how to, parent their children, first of all. And I think that's a big thing and even a problem in the United States. But obviously, it's not as bad in China, where they can tell you how many children you can have, and what time your child has to be off playing video games, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's kind of scary and frightening, especially when about half the world is torn between America or following the way of China, which is almost biblical in proportion. I think we have to take note and watch what they do over there, make sure that we don't replicate the same infringements on our freedoms and liberties. And I think when we start talking about these things, whose job is it to be the parent of the child, number one? And number two, why is this tech so addicting? When we start looking into it, did you know that tech companies purposely do research to find out how to make their games more addicting so that children don't want to put them down?
Yeah, that's a serious concern. And there are certainly areas about personal freedoms in China imposing this curfew. I will say that it seems a little bit like a lot of things that are coming from our media about China, that it's a handy canard, sort of red herring. I lived in East Asia. I lived in Korea for a year, and I even at that time, some years ago, about a decade ago, this issue was already a quite serious one. People they have a fairly immersed and bordering on obsessive gaming culture there, and in other East Asian countries, and I think that some kind of regulatory at a certain point, when it becomes disruptive, some kind of regulatory measures might be called for. I would say, of all of the concerns that I would have about China, this would be fairly low on my list. But it is an interesting set of concerns, and one that, like all concerns of this kind, we want to at least be a voice for freedom on the subject.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So let's go back to that other story about Jesus Christ. I think he's coming back down. An artificial retina that could help restore sight to the blind. So this used to be only a thing a miracle worker could do. Jesus, he could restore sight to the blind by throwing dust in people's faces. But now, looks like technology's caught up. Kriston, do you have any news for us on that?
I'm going to tell you what. If I was blind, sign me up.
Hell yeah.
I know that a lot of times I get a bad rap as somebody who seems to be anti, technology and, terms like that. But to be honest, there's a lot of technology I embrace. Maybe I'm not the biggest purist, but I think that this is an area where I believe technology can be very beneficial. If we can have,
can I just say that optical makes me really excited, because I do not want to wear glasses. I love my eyesight. Optical is so great. Anyway, continue. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like being colorblind and being able to put on some shades and see color for the first time. I think that then the question is going to be is what kind of robotic retinas are we going to have? Are these retinas going to record everything and wirelessly transmit them via Wi-Fi to some brain hive or drone that's flying above to transmit your information of what you're viewing? Or will you be able to download that into a computer, let's say your whole day, and be able to review it for later? I mean, there's benefits there. If you forget something, you can, I forgot where I can't tell you. I don't know if it's the humanity of me, but I forget things. And maybe I forgot where I put something. I can download everything that was in my retina into a computer and view through the computer and see what I did throughout that day. I'm trying to tell you where this is going. And that reminds me a lot of the conspiracy of the soul catcher chip, which is essentially now fact, that they could actually do that. And I think there's a lot of benefits, but at the same time, the question is, who has access to this information?
Privacy is so central to all of these chats and all of these discussions. And, it's one of the reasons that we talk about China so much, because those guys don't have privacy. Thank goodness for America that it was embedded in freedom and privacy as part of a constitutional framework. So everything they've done, they've had to do on the sneaky, because it's really hard to get around your constitution in that way. Another thing, Kristen Conklin and stuff and others talk about is human rights. She's
commenting right now. Yeah.
Human rights. Well, you got to have, the United Nations had a great shot at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This needs to either be expanded globally in a real sense of the fashion, and I don't really mind, like, let's put Agenda 21, 2030, whatever you're talking about. It's Agenda 2030 now, by the way, but anyway, let's put that over to the side for a second, and let's say an expansion of the UN Declaration of Human Rights is not a bad thing. Would anyone disagree that the expansion of the UN Declaration of Human Rights is a bad thing?
Negative, but I don't think that's what they mean by that. It's like saying that the United Nations is a peacekeeping operation, but it's not peace through diplomacy, it's peace through war. Who controls the food? Who decides how it's rationed out? Who controls the electricity? Who controls which way you drive? I mean, who's making these decisions? They like to make you think you are on a county level, but you really aren't. These are ideas that are coming from the Council on Foreign Relations, from the Bilderberg Group, from different organizations, our global think tank, and that don't really have per se maybe America's best interest. When we're talking about the world, we're talking about a big place, and I'd have to say each culture has different needs above and beyond every other culture, and we should, at a local level, be able to decide what is best for us. But instead, they do these Delphi meetings, and this is where we're getting into psychology. As a person who has given many types of meetings, a Delphi meeting is basically where you have 6 guys at a table, and then you have one person who is designated there from the county to kind of lead at that table, and you say, hey, if you have ideas for the city, write them down. And let's say the idea that they give fits outside the predetermined plan. They say, oh, that's a great idea, but I tell you what, write it down and we'll look at it later. And initially that idea gets thrown away at the end of the meeting. And then somebody who has an idea that may be inclusive of the preconceived outcome and plan of the city, they go, oh, yeah, you want that statue? That's a great idea. We'll put a statue of our local hero, the Crusher, and that fits perfectly into our agenda. And the truth is they make blighted zones. They do mixed development where they literally steal property, and a lot of times they drain local funds to fund these ideas, so we can't afford law enforcement, and we depend on federal grants. There's a lot of issues when we talk about UN Agenda 21. The idea and the principle about it is really good, but not when it's a takeover of our liberties and freedoms and setting up the potential for a mass metadata collection surveillance state. Did you know in New Mexico, they made a whole fake city, and all they do is test this kind of stuff, artificial intelligence, robots, self-driving cars. They have stadiums and churches in it. I wrote about this years ago, and it's still out there to this very day. So, I mean, this is well planned out, and the question is to what ends? Who's making these decisions, and what's the end game? Where does this all go? Is it going to be used to benefit us, or is it not? If I have a self-driving car, can I get in and drive wherever I want, when I want, or am I going to be limited on freedoms? And I guess if they're a good value, maybe I'll be willing to compensate.
You mentioned that during your primary run. You said you like it, but also driving your car is one of the few freedoms you have left, because you can decide whether to go left or right or into the bush, right? So right. What do you say on self-driving cars in that way?
Well, I mean, I love self-driving car idea. I think it's great. Some people can't drive. I can tell you when there's a 90-year-old person who looks like they're about to kiss the windshield of their car driving up my rear while I'm driving, it'd be nice to say, hey, maybe you guys want to have a service where self-driving cars drive elderly people around all the time. I think there's great opportunity. At the same time, I think the idea of jacking insurance prices up so high that the average human can't afford to drive on their own, because people who drive are the number one threat to driverless cars because they're unpredictable, is wrong. So only the wealthy can then drive. Only the person that makes a lot of money can afford $50.
The insurance argument will disappear when interest rates rise, but insurance companies are in a whole lot of stress because they can't make money in a zero interest rate environment. And I hear this all the time. It's like one of the reasons that this show is called Debt Nation is because you end up with all this misallocation of capital, and on your whole system is skewed when you have a debt consolidated economy, a global economy built on a debt-based system that it skews up everything. And the insurance industry is one of these victims of really low misallocation of capital built on zero interest rate policy. There's a whole raft of industries that are under this agenda. It's the whole system's messed in that way. But sorry, continue. I don't think it's their fault. I think it's they can't put their money anywhere. So
I'm just saying that. Just saying is that we have to be careful what's being gift wrapped and handed to us, because if it looks too good and sounds too good to be true, there's always a catch. There's always been a catch. That's government, though. That's government. There's somebody that's going to make money. There's somebody who has power to gain. And if we want to restore that to people, us at a local community, we need to start running for office as transhumanist-party people. Get into your local county. I encourage you to get involved in school board. And believe it or not, that's probably one of the most powerful and financial controlling organizations in your city. Run for things like that. Bring awareness. Educate other people that are involved. You'll be surprised the type of people that get elected. Not saying that they're not qualified. But I meet people that are. One of the assemblywomen I ran against, she used to manage a Burger King before she ran for state assembly. I mean, that's literally anyone can do this job. And just think about the qualifications between somebody like that or somebody who's technologically, advanced. They'll be able to speak to a lot of these things. I think everyone has opportunities in the nation, and that's why you should get out there and run. Just because you work a day job that's normal or you have a basic job doesn't mean that you can't impact the world around you and make a difference, so.
Absolutely. About the self-driving car concern, we do want to always concern ourselves with people's individual choice and these kind of things, but it's easy to veer into a kind of a moralism that doesn't necessarily affect people's quality of life. So 35,000 people a year approximately are dying in automotive fatalities here in the United States. Having a self-driving system, even 10% of the vehicles on the road, that would reduce the number of deaths larger than 10%. It would just sort of operate like a disease vector disruption. And so that's how I think we should think about these things. That should be more at the top of our list of talking points than whether people should be feel free or happy about doing this or that. These are important considerations, but we always want to be looking at outcomes. And I feel much the same way about concerns that were described about the United Nations. You know, here in the futurist community, there's a lot of different opinions about how to proceed in this increasingly connected world. We've begun working on this initiative, working with an Apollo 1 app to set up a blockchain voting system in the interest of beginning to set the stage for a world where we are able to be using these increasingly sophisticated systems to navigate this tricky 21st century. And this high degree of digitalization is, again, one of those things that will help us deal with that. And we have to think of that often in transnational terms and be somewhat open to that. But of course, Kristan's points about those existing power structures are valid concerns. But again, I think we have to always try to be thinking in terms of outcomes and an ordering of importance there, and what we want to see happen, as well as what we don't want to see happen.
Well, Kristan, the next one you sent us is this implantable digital ID system in development. Yikes. What happened there?
Which one are we talking about? Are we talking about the one that delivers
the Medium article? You've sent us a Medium article here about
yeah, the Medium. That's my favorite application here.
Implantable digital ID.
ID 2020, relating.
What we're talking about.
Integration with vaccinations.
We've had plenty of grinders on the show, body hackers, grinders, etc. They're incredible people. Would you agree to have a microchip implanted into your body? That's a question Microsoft Group of pharmaceutical companies are asking. Microsoft is spearheading an initiative called ID 2020, a program aimed at giving every human on the planet a digital ID like a fingerprint in order to keep everyone connected. Now, this would go right up the alley of a lack of personal freedom, super surveillance state. What do you reckon?
I reckon that this was an old Christian movie called A Thief in the Night, where they gave everyone this thing they called the Mark of the Beast. I'm just joking, sort of, kind of, but that was a real and that was 40 years ago, and it's kind of crazy how predictive and creative individuals are and how spot on they become, like Gene Roddenberry who Star Trek and everything else. It's just crazy how all this stuff is coming down the road. And I think, honestly, as a libertarian, I believe people should have the choice whether or not they have these things implanted in the body. My concern is, why does it have to be in the body? Why can't it be a bracelet? Why can't it be something you can take on or off?
Because that's already been done. It's called your mobile phone.
Yes. So why do they need this technology then? Like, so what's the point? Is it like
because there's no internet ID? That's the other problem. Apart from your Gmail account, I mean, there's too much competition on the internet. So your internet ID is almost your Gmail, and it's not quite that, but you know, it's close enough. But they don't actually have an internet ID, so they're going the next best thing to an internet ID. And actually, the next best thing to your internet ID is everything else.
Well,
yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, I think that the idea of characterizing this kind of technology as somehow Luciferian, it does reflect some real concerns. It also reflects a kind of knee-jerk, a kind of body horror reaction to that, or some other kinds of, I would say, relatively reductive lines of thought.
I do like microchips. I'm just with Kristen. I think libertarian idea. I think a lot of people.
I would tend to say that people should have obviously be able to opt out of this sort of thing, and there should obviously be a high level of transparency in implementing this kind of thing. But
the way you ask it is you say to the Bernie Sanders crowd, okay, Trump's going to microchip you. Are you okay with that? And they all go no. And then you go to the Trump crowd. Oh, Bernie Sanders is going to microchip you. Are you okay with that? No. So then everybody would all of a sudden agree that choice is the best option, because both parties don't want to be forced by a party that they don't like, right?
Right, but that's allowing some kind of transactional and hyper partisan business to interfere with the functionality of the system.
Yeah, but that's a way of saying that it should be a libertarian idea, that you shouldn't force people to get microchips on behalf of the state. Go to North Korea if you want that. Like, honestly.
Well, okay, so here I'm going to point to another technology that of a 20th century kind that also fills people with this Cronenbergian body horror type thing, but something that I think had people embraced it at this time, it would have changed medicine for the better, and that is namely that I'm sure Kristen Harris is. I know he's done a show on this subject about 8 decades ago. Russian scientists were beginning to do head transplantations, and at a level that was decades beyond what other scientists were doing at the time in this mid 20th century. And this technology, had we all been able to switch off this button in our mind that fills us with shock and disgust at something like this, we would have been in a position, I think, to see that this kind of thing could have led to better public health outcomes, but instead it became effectively an orphan technology that was not utilized because people were horrified by it. We want to maybe this is a rather extreme case, but if something has tremendous public health or organizational implications, but we decide to disregard those positive outcomes because of hurt feelings or fear or sadness, that's a little bit of a silly way to go about for anyone to go about their business, in my view. So we have to really try and emphasize what actually happens in this situation. What is the downside of people using this set of systems? And as far as this ID 2020 is gone, if you remove the emotional noise from the equation, I would say that it's relatively little. But there would be extreme cases and concerns of various kinds. But we have to, I think, weigh that against how much better our civilization can be in this sort of thing. This is a pretty typical argument in futurism studies.
I think microchips I think microchips are inherently neutral, as all technologies are. All I don't want the government saying, oh, sorry, I can't give you Social Security because you don't have a microchip. That's exactly what I don't want. I want to be able to access my Social Security.
We already have any number of pretexts for denial of services of these kinds. But that is very upsetting.
Well, I think there's some things I would like to mention on this topic. I think that,
but I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something though. But if I was joining a company, and let's just say it is any company, and they said, by the way, you've got to get microchip to join our company, I'd find that's the company's rules. Now, as long as it wasn't all the companies in the place, like, I'm okay with a company microchipping you as part of an employment contract, and like even if it's a limited term contract, like you have to be in microchip for our contract, whatever. I'm okay with that as well. That's just an individual contract between you, and that's how it should work between the government and the people.
Yeah, I mean, a corporation setting the standards for that, to my way of thinking, is as disconcerting as any institution doing it. But we have to be on guard for how these things are actually being used, and there's any number of situations, including the sort of famous case in the United States Transhumanist-Party legal history, where in Carson City, Nevada, the chairman of our organization advocated for continuing to allow cyborgs, quote unquote, to be able to implant RFID chips in that community. And what was actually prohibited was corporations kind of stipulating that be done. And so to my mind, we want to be particularly on guard with corporatist excess in this set of concerns, but we certainly want to be thinking in those terms all quite nearly as much as about government overreach.
Chris, Don?
Well, there's a couple of points I want to touch on. First of all, I think fear is a very important natural thing. I think that there's a reason why children are afraid of the dark. I think it's built into our DNA that when you were a kid prehistorically and you slept outside in the dark, crazy, scary things lurk in the dark. Bears and lions and wolves, and they're going to get you in the night because that's when the things that the creatures that lurk, they lurk. And I think that fear is what keeps us alive in many times. And there's a healthy amount of fear, but then there's an amount of fear where you're being too careful and it's not really beneficial. It's actually hindering. So the question is this something that's a detractor or is this a promoter of good behavior and good health? So that's my statement on disagreement. Kind of disagree.
By and large, I think it's an artifact.
Yeah,
but there is an argument to be made there.
The other thing is when it comes to this, I'm not so much looking at, this is something neat that we can potentially mandate. What happens when companies only take this form of currency and they require you to have these to put in, like you mentioned, Steele? Where is this going to go? And then at what point do they just skip microchipping altogether and they just write it into your DNA with CRISPR so you can download and upload and everything?
There's not a lot of in the near term. There's not a lot of likelihood of some kind of a global monoculture being imposed upon all of us. So I mean, in the network world, today, what's happened is we have more institutions and more choices stemming from digitalization pushes. So the idea that somehow that would be reversed and we would have one institution to rule them all, that's a simplistic thought experiment in my view. But it is probably a longer term likelihood, just as I do believe that something that we've all discussed in this program together, something like an omega point, which also is promoted by certain Christian apologists as well, is something that we will likely see in the coming centuries. But that is a longer term consideration, and we should be talking about the world of a decade or two out in discussing these things. And I feel that a concern of a global entity imposing this upon everyone is so unlikely.
Ben, you're missing the point.
That's not how it happens. Yeah. I think how it happens is China mandates designer babies, and 17 years from now, and America goes, well, damn, China can't be the only nation that gets children and never get fat. They're always healthy and never die. Well, that's what we're going to need. And then that's how it starts.
You're right, Chris Dunn. And you know who brought that up with me, like almost straight away, was Zoltan Itzvan when he came on. He said, there's an arms race in that field, and America's being left behind. There's an arms race.
A very disconcerting arms race. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and George Bush with the GMO project and a bunch of others, he threw America behind the arms race, right?
Yeah, but Josiah Zahner in this Unnatural Selection show, he says, in the course of this arms race, what's the net result of that? That you have people who are smarter and healthier. That's not a dystopia, but we have to seriously consider a lot of other implications there. But I think by and large, when we're talking about emerging technology, we're talking about a 99% net positive and a 1% set of concerns that we should rightly concern ourselves with. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we are being overwhelmingly benefited by these things. That's true.
Absolutely. Like brain chips, if you lost your memory and you could have a brain chip boot that, what a great convenience. Yeah. Absolutely. But if you have a brain chip that does that and the contract says in the small writing that has a kill chip and you don't pay your loan, they shut the chip off, maybe you have, you owe money on it and they are going to remotely shut off. It's literally interesting conversations. And I'm glad, Ben, by the way, I have to commend you on how well you're doing in conversating and how far you've come overall, as even in the last 3 weeks or 3 months of just talking and doing shows nonstop. I can see that there's been a huge difference in the way you react and everything. I just want to give you major props as a person who's done a lot of shows. I want to say it's a big improvement. It's not easy to do, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's fun. It's been fun, and it's been a great learning experience. I thank you for that. Yeah, go on, Stu.
I have to second that notion because, you know, like, yeah, there's huge improvements, and it's good for the USTP, you know, to have these sorts of talking points out there. I mean, we're challenging, but we're building up the base of information, and we're you know, attacking on ethical flanks here. So you'll be a well-rounded person in the end. You know, we don't just want a single side talking point, because you're going to have to, you know, I'm sure you do meet people who are skeptics all the time, right, on the campaign trail.
Oh yeah. And you know, it's pretty incredible because I met a lot of folks in the course of this 5-state tour, who I would describe as what we've discussed in this program quite a lot. These de facto life extensionists. People who use technology in their daily life. They have a set of concerns that are varied but legitimate concerns. But they are people who, if they have access to this, these set of things, like we talked about this, if they're public health service or their private or public carrier made available to them this eye implant, or what was in the news earlier in the week, also an implantable artificial kidney is now coming to market. A great benefit for people who are waiting to receive kidney transplants, or waiting perhaps for other technologies, because you know, that dialysis, it's not fun for people. And that this kind of thing, as people have all of these various interventions that would tend to lead to longer lifespans available to them, you know, they might have these philosophical discussions that we're having, but they will embrace these things because people want to live well and people want to be happy. And when they're faced with those choices, they make the right choice. And so I'm always pleased, actually, when people come to me with these techno-skeptic discussions in the course of this, in these shows, in the course of this tour, because it shows to me, it demonstrates also that we are all really ultimately on the facing the right direction and on the same page with the most important of these issues.
So, Kriston, you've brought us another one here. This could be something that USTP goes out on the streets and actually just holds up a sign, and you know, it might be an easy PR story, but Time magazine, of all things, 1 in 4 Americans apparently unaware the Earth orbits the sun. That some sort of National Science Foundation has done a study. I'm not shocked. Sorry, I'm not shocked. Not shocked from Australia. But what do you say there in the heart of the solar system, America?
Well, I think that it comes down to education again. There's 2 or 3 things they don't teach anymore. It used to be standard science, standard education. First is the Constitution. Average school spends 1 day on the Constitution. That's how important they feel it is. And I think that's creating erosion. Children, colleges, college students, people at Yale, Harvard, Mark Dice, multiple people have shown that, you know, that people are clueless on what their rights are legally through the Constitution. And I think that should be very important. Secondly, I think the reason why this isn't being talked about comes down to global warming and climate change. I think that's another thing, because they used to tell you that 80% of our weather is controlled by the sun, and 20% is mixed between solar system paths and many other, you know, curve and tilt of the axis of the planet and everything else. Now it's, you know, it's very controversial when you think that the sun may help dictate our climate on this planet. And then we start to talk about what percentage that is compared to how much we really affect it, which nobody has come up with an answer of what percentage point we affect the weather, just that we do. And I believe that. But if it's such a minuscule, if we have no control over it, what are we panicking for? And how does taxes fix that? Because taxes don't fix anything.
I don't buy your argument. I don't buy that it's education is the problem. You guys are the richest country in the history of the world. With internet's almost ubiquitous. I mean, you can go into any McDonald's and you can, you know, there's public school. You're forced to go to school and learn about the solar system. It's ignorance or laziness or one or the other. I mean, come on, it's got to be something other than, oh, they didn't learn it, the poor little darlings. I mean, that's just some America First rubbish.
Well, for one thing, these kind of gotcha. Oh, somebody didn't understand a question or made a mistake on a survey, and now it's a soft news story.
Yeah.
These things are always kind of insulting to you.
Time magazine is not a soft news story.
Well, the story itself, it's not the greatest thought piece ever put forth. But that being said, there is an awful lot of sort of know-nothing preoccupations in this country. People who are willfully ignorant of scientific ideas, and this story also said that a fairly high percentage of people in the EU, but a lower number, did get this question wrong as well. So it's not only limited to the United States, but it is a little bit more of a serious concern in this country that people are not interested in science and not interested in rational thought, and that is troubling, and that does stem, as Mr. Harris said, from educational outcomes. It stems from cultural failings, in my view, as well.
Yeah, but isn't there some other study that said that a bunch of Americans, a huge percentage of them, still think the moon is made of cheese or something?
What? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. You could ask Eric spends hundreds of thousands of dollars wondering why lesbians are fat, and these are real studies that they invest in. I mean,
this is why we need brain chip implants, so there's
why
just
do we
general
need
knowledge
robots?
dump straight away. It's like, okay, the sun is at the center of the firstly, there's a thing called the solar system, and there's a round planet. It's not even flat. I mean, we've got to get over that part. Then we've got to say it's circled by this thing called a moon, which is made of, some sort of helium-3 rock, carbonate. It's not cheese. And then once we get over all that, we're like, oh, there's a bunch of planets, and they all go around this big fire thing called the sun. Okay, and then, wow, that's
Well, it's also to some degree a feature of a more. So it's a double-edged sword having constant access to data. It's a double-edged sword, Googling everything at every turn.
Yeah.
You don't commit things to memory in the same way.
And
that's maybe seems like a glib thing to say, but if you're looking at how this plays out over the course of the 21st century, we're looking at a world where we have to sort of redefine what literacy is. Literacy is not the ability to retain facts; it's the ability to manipulate said information as it is at your disposal. And so the fact that Americans may not retain as much information as they did, they're, I believe, doing more with that information. It actually comes to an interesting set of concerns about actual emerging technologies like natural language processing and brain-computer interfaces. What is the definition of a person who is testing well in a situation where a person is not even really required to be able to read at all to be high functioning? In that set of context where you have brain-computer interfaces and fully the highest level of natural language processing, these definitions are going to have to change. And we have to not allow some kind of older ideas or elitist notions about who is smart and who is dumb kind of interfere with the actual functionality of these emerging technologies.
I'm just kind of curious why the filthy rich and wealthy then send all their kids to Waldorf schools where they don't get vaccinated and they don't use technology. Just throwing it out there, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, so many of these other people. But I think it's because of the fact that technology in a lot of ways in education stumps your imagination. When you read a book, you had to imagine what these characters look like. But now we got tablets that show you what Johnny and Jimmy look like in that big castle that he's going to go save Susie in, or whatever the story is that your kids might read, Fahrenheit 451, or, everything has images, and it kind of stumps that feature. Yeah. There's a lot of things that we can talk about with technology that has great benefits, though. I think that having access to the encyclopedia of everything is important for our youth, but I think it's how we monitor it and how we use it and in what form we use it. And what are the pros and cons? So as technology in school is very beneficial, but at what ages? At a younger age, if they're doing more reading out of books and using imagination and learning how to make decisions rather than swiping left and right and only having two options. If you only have two options, what are the odds you're going to ever think outside the box if you get, here's your option A, B, C, pick one, but there might be.
It's like at school. I used to fail.
There is something to humanize.
It's like at school. I used to fail pattern recognition tests all the time because, like, they would give me a pattern, right? They would give you a pattern, and it had a limited length. It was like a square, two triangles, a circle, a square, two triangles, a circle, and a square. And they would say, "What's the continuation of the pattern?" And I would always just say it's unknown. Like, I don't know how long this thing goes for. You didn't give me a defined length of, like, it could change at any time. I don't know. Like, the answer is always unknown. And they're like, well, you just have to write in a whole bunch of basic assumptions that this pattern will always continue. And I'm like, it doesn't say that anywhere that this pattern is always going to repeat the same way. And it's like my way of, like, thinking outside of the box, and then I got punished for that. And I'm not complaining about that, but they didn't, like, properly define that. It always used to annoy me because we had those things all the time, and it was just like, I was always coming up with the same answer. I was just like, this doesn't make sense. Like, unless you write a defined rule that says this pattern will now repeat, and then they're like, well, you had to figure that out. And it's like, no, that doesn't make sense because the pattern is whatever you want the pattern to be. Everything's malleable. Anyway,
you can make the same kind of argument in this, following this basic internal logic of educational institutions as being just training grounds for other kinds of sort of the inculcating of relatively simplistic lines of thought. You know, every institution of this kind that's ever existed would be to some degree a sort of nationalist kind of entity. People go to school to learn about the country that they live in as much as any particular educational outcome. And this is something that I think this prospect of having new ways of doing this. Now, I've said this a number of times that in this situation and moving towards a more fully realized post-industrial civilization, moving more towards a post-scarcity framework. Let's imagine for a moment that we live in a country that has a middle-class basic income, that has paid child care, and that has data as a civil right. That those components are also the basic components for someone having an unschooling type experience. So in that framework, the civilization might not feel compelled to have compulsory education in the way that we understand it, because these other needs are being met. And we have the ability to have a sort of a more organic approach to the way that we're educating ourselves and the future generation. Now, that's maybe a future thought experiment, but it does reflect how these institutions do have flaws in them. Then we accept those flaws because we don't think that we can improve upon them. But of course, all things being equal, a different world is quite likely. And we can be moving in that direction.
Yeah, good point. So there's another one here, Kriston Harris, you bought us, and it's all about Alexa. Hey, Alexa, can a robot with AI or your voice assistant help you feel less lonely? So we were talking about sex bots and all that before. Amazon Alexa, sorry to hear that. Talking to a friend, listening to music, or taking a walk might help. I hope you feel better soon. Alexa's artificial intelligence-infused heart may be in the right place, but there's only so far an AI can go to comfort someone who is alone. All the same, Alexa's response raises questions about just what type of role an AI can play to cure loneliness, especially among the elderly. Loneliness has been identified as a leading cause of depression among people over the age of 65. I just did an interview with Arvin about USTP officer about depression. Was really good. But let's talk about this more broadly. Kriston, open AI and loneliness. Do you reckon artificial intelligence can alleviate loneliness for people? This is the reason I'm opening on you is because you were mentioning before about human touch and your relationship with your youth when you had human interaction as opposed to now.
Well, we talk about that, but if we're talking about using this medically in an aspect that it would help people not take antidepressants or psychotropic rehabilitators that say right in a pill bottle may cause suicidal tendencies of SSRIs, I think it's a great thing. I think it can be used in a very great positive manner. I just think it may be just like antidepressants are, where after a while they stop working and you start going, what's wrong with me? And then you go back to the doctor and they up the dosage and up the dosage. How long is it a short-term solution? I guess it's something we need to do studies on. I think that AI can help loneliness. I think it can keep you busy and keep your mind off of stuff, no different than a PlayStation can. But the question is it getting to the core root of the problem? Are we fixing the cause of the issue, or are we just treating symptoms, much like we do in the medical industry? So.
Yeah, and that is a good way of framing that, I think, and it kind of goes back maybe to what I was saying a moment ago about reconceiving this idea of literacy. We have to maybe consider that some ideas of what is going to be normal in this high level of virtualization will be something that we'll have to be reconceiving with each new generation of technology. But we do want to be first and foremost sure that people are able to interact well with one another and be feeling well, and we're not just giving them a Band-Aid for a serious problem. But I do think that overall this type of technology, I was on a strategy meeting with a ranking officer in the UK Transhumanist-Party yesterday for quite a while, good buddy Thomas, and we were talking about setting up an interview with the folks at the Ninja Theory, a game company that's now working on precisely this, a game that allows people to really start to address some of these things and look at these things in new ways, and that's an exciting prospect. I feel. Kristan mentioned a moment ago psychiatric medicine. I feel that we'll look at these psychiatric medicine interventions of the day, much the way that we look at psychosurgery from the early 20th century in some decades, as we have better options available to us. And I think that these interfaces are far less potentially damaging and have a lot more good things that they offer. And but we have to see what the results are.
Are you suggesting that Rachel Haywire no longer needs a lobotomy?
Well, I don't think that Rachel Haywire is in need of any such thing. But I would say that there's pilot programs of this kind for anyone. So folks should try and look into those.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this whole AI loneliness idea is actually a really healthy debate, and you can play it out not just to these artificial carriers. So when you look at iRobot, before you get to the evil robots in iRobot in the books or in the movie with Will Smith, you have those sort of helpful handyman robots or handy women robots or whatever they are. Those robots that are quite functional in society and then have been taken into society as just other people. They're just other members of society. They move about. They're delivery men. They do the U.S. Postal or whatever. They're cooks. They're cleaners. They're candlestick makers. And people just interact with them as if they're almost other humans. And you see, you could take that out also to pets. So you can go out with your robot dog and it can interact with you in a more fundamental way. And you could do that with pets, and yeah, it's interesting. It's real interesting. Yeah, I think that that technology does offer solutions to loneliness and depressed people, because a lot of people just need interaction, and they just need to have that interaction. And sometimes they don't want to interact with other people. They might have disorders, anxiety, stress, other things that don't allow them to interact with other people, or low energy levels. And technology alleviates that from them, where it allows them to get out what they're trying to do, get out what they're saying. The elderly as well, fantastic example. But they don't have to deal with the stress of a bumbling, stumbling human.
Yeah, and that is a serious a serious point on this. It's very easy to say, well, this is maybe not the way things have always been done. But another feature of that way that things have always been done in terms of socialization is that socialization has always been imperfect. Nobody has quite the number of man hours devoted to their upbringing or personal care that they would need. And in the late 20th century, particularly, we've seen some of that drop off. People are living further away from their loved ones. People have other professional responsibilities that keep them from engaging in the way that they did with those around them. And so we have this problem of people, a tremendous number of people being isolated, an overwhelming number of elderly people being isolated. And these kind of interaction frameworks that we're talking about will solve those problems. And it's all well and good to say that it might be nice for those folks to have more actual humans in their lives, but they do not. And so we have to find ways to see that people are living well.
Tristan, did you have anything else to add? Otherwise, I'll ask you the next one if you don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, let me, no, that's, I think that's pretty much it. We covered it pretty well. I have another article for you that I find very fascinating that's on this topic. If you want
go for it.
My homie Dan Dix published an article, U.S. military to create AI that can detect and fight fake news. So my question is who decides what is fake news? And if the AI is going to decide, it's only going to decide what it's programmed to do for the most part. So the question is how beneficial is this kind of software going to be?
Well, see that there's different degrees there. So financial fake news is easy to spot, because if you say the Dow Jones was at 105 today, and that's really easy because the fake news algorithm will go quickly correlate the numbers and go, that was easy. But if Johnny said to Jim in the cave somewhere, I mean, how do you know about that? I mean, that's a global surveillance there? That's your retina right there, right? Because then, how do you pick up real world scenarios? There's certain things that are easy for that. If a news reporter read out a news item, you get the translators that are always getting better on YouTube and stuff, and it'll be able to pick up that and say, well, Trump actually said, or Hillary actually said, or some politician actually said, this is the quote, and you've misquoted, therefore you're fake news. That sort of stuff is not hard, but you get into some of the audio visual stuff, the components, the real world crazy stuff, and that's going to get a lot harder.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to want to preserve certain kinds of cultural properties and lines of thought that people have some attachment to that may or may not be providing any real benefit. I think of a parallel kind of a thought experiment around. Imagine, so we've talked a little bit about China. They're doing some pretty shocking things in certain ways. One shocking thing that they're doing is imposing a social credit system. But if you can imagine that social credit system not having the excesses and impinging on the liberties to quite this degree that the Chinese one seems to be doing, but what is the net result of having people plugged into this system, which is tending to create a kind of monoculture? The net result is that there's a little bit less maybe superstitious or fallacious thinking, and a little bit more of a dedication to scientism. And hopefully that doesn't disrupt other people's ways of life. But it's generally a good thing to be moving away from fallacious lines of thought. And I think of this set of concerns, we can say there that it is a double-edged sword, but by and large, when we see these kind of algorithms able to parse what is true and what is not true, we will all be tending to benefit pretty well from it. but it is fair to say that we need to put a very careful look at all of that.
My question is, why do we need somebody to tell us what is fake news and not in the first place? Shouldn't we be able to decide for ourselves? I mean, that's what we had all the way up to about 3 years ago.
No, but there is. You admitted at the start of this whole thing, Kriston, that Operation Mockingbird or whatever was designed to confuse the hell out of society, right? So there has to be truth when you're reporting the news. Otherwise, it's by definition fake news, right? You're not allowed to. That's the whole point of news. As an idea is objectivism. Otherwise, everything else is commentary, and it's not like an algorithm to figure out fake commentary, right? And I think that's what you're worried about. Is like, is it going to censor my ideas and my thoughts? No, it's there to censor fake facts, like literally fake facts. Like it doesn't matter who delivers those fake facts, whether that's the president of the United States or Steel Archer on Dead Nation or Kriston Harris on Rundown Live, right?
We really have to remember that for every good point that Kriston has made about Russiagate being dramatically overblown, there's underreported elements to systems of misinformation domestically. The degree to which Cambridge Analytica and similar institutions have influenced recent elections is something that people tend to want to underreport, and that's why they're sort of focusing on the scapegoat in the form of Russia to a high degree. This outsized influence that corporations can have on these systems of information and using these various strategies, gastroturfing and all manner of server farms and these data aggregators. All of this stuff that's not a pure landscape of information that people might suppose. It's quite polluted, and that is what people are reacting to, and that is what is forcing folks' hands, I think, in wanting to see these things cleaned up a little bit.
So, Steele, so you feel like the government that brought us Operation Mockingbird is going to tell us what is real news then, and that's legit?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying...
That's exactly, but that's what we're getting at. You're like, well, we need this, but yet look at who's providing it. It's the same people that are lying to us and giving us the disinfo and propaganda, and they're the ones that are going to come up with the item that's going to tell us what is true and what is not from fake news. So I don't see this being used non-sinisterly. It's a tool, and yes, it could be used for good, but just like, everyone in social media who said they weren't censoring anyone else, surprise, surprise, every leak, every one of these social media outlets is election tampering much worse than Russia is, in my opinion.
I know, and I am disappointed. I am disappointed with YouTube, and I am disappointed with Facebook, and I'm disappointed with Twitter for their censoring. I think it's, especially of conservatives, I think it's just horrible. Because everybody should be entitled to an opinion and a platform, not to spread hate or incite violence or anything like that. But definitely, if you just have a standard opinion,
we have a serious problem where in court, corporate money is regarded as speech in this country, and that allows to wholly infiltrate normal channels of discussion and prop up ideologies that more or less would be disregarded otherwise.
Receiving government money, that's just it. If you're receiving government money and you're claiming to be a public forum, then you should adhere to constitutional law. You shouldn't be just regulating what you want and what you shouldn't. And that's the argument that some players should really have, but they're just not smart enough, or they just don't figure it out. I just don't get what they're doing, because Twitter claims to be a public forum, Facebook, and that's how they get out of so many of these troublesome issues that they're having. But yet when it comes to the fact that we want freedom of speech and censorship, all of a sudden, we're a private company, which is
they do tend to present themselves as public forums, but they are structured legally and in form as actual, their publications are private entities.
A unicorn, that. Do you believe that? I guess that's what it comes down to. So
yeah.
All I'm saying is I'm not. I mean, there's fact checkers all over the world. There's people who are paid to be fact checkers, who are manual fact checkers. This is just an algorithm. It's going to run through, and it's a fact checker. It's a fact checker algorithm. I don't have a problem with a fact checker algorithm. Now, what I do have a problem with is a conversation algorithm. If it says, "Oh, I don't like that debate," shut that down or whatever. That's crossing the line, because what is news? Well, news is supposed to be an objective presentation. It's supposed to be, today 14 people died in a hurricane because the hurricane existed somewhere. That's it. That's the news. That's the finished story. Everything after that is commentary. So that I don't have a problem with. And imagine the amount of government news it's going to pick up that's fake. I mean, it's going to go off the charts.
Yeah, I believe it was called the GPT-2 program. You guys probably both fairly familiar with this. A program that's able to create a tremendous amount of new content that seems to have been written professionally by human beings, but it can be, but it's entirely generated, and this can be something that is just an enormous fake news engine. And this program was so controversial that the creators decided not to release it as they had initially planned, because they felt that it could an amount of misinformation that was, and it was finally released quite recently, I believe, but under slightly different conditions.
It was leaked. It wasn't even, it wasn't properly released. It was leaked. We don't know in what form. Could be an earlier version. Could be, we don't know for sure all the specs. But you're right. So that's just it. Is at what point is somebody going to start selling this stuff to terrorist organizations? Because that's where the money's at. All you have to do is have a disgruntled employee. Look at Google. Look at what Project Veritas does. I mean, that's positive or negative, but it doesn't take long. Project Veritas I look at as a somewhat positive thing, where they expose corruption that we kind of have rumored to go out there. The other aspect, I think things that they do get blown out of proportion a lot of times and are made worse than what they really are. But that's just one example. But there's what's it going to take? One disgruntled employee who's upset. I can think of maybe a gazillion things that could go wrong. And I don't know. That's a big responsibility we got to put on each other, especially when it comes to AI, because artificial intelligence at some level, if we give it ultimate freedom, and I'm a person that doesn't want regulation, but when it comes to talking about whether or not we're going to worship something as God and live as slaves, or if we're going to be the masters of our own life, I'm going to tell you we need to regulate the shit out of that AI. And I'm not a person that believes in it, but I'm telling you, at some level, when we have to think about our generations, we want to talk about climate change in 12 years. Let's talk about 30 years when AI starts fixing itself, and writing its own code and being smart, and it's going to kill us. It's no different. I think that's as equal of a concern as, climate change. And I think there's
definitely an advanced algorithm framework where we have to assume that everything is on the table, that a high level of regulation is required, and a high level.
Not going to argue.
Yeah. But this is an existential risk that we are looking at. It's people, it's a Fermi paradox argument. Why don't I find space aliens? And the reason is that in transitioning from a Kardashev 0 to a Kardashev 1 civilization, in this developing of advanced algorithms to this level, we might accidentally be creating things that destroy a civilization. That might be something that happens as a matter of course to all civilizations. And that's a disturbing prospect, and reason enough for us to want to think of AI safety at the top of everyone's list. And this is a kind of a prototype of some kind, a proto example of a concern of this kind. I do tend to believe that maybe the advanced algorithms and predictive algorithms from which these risks derive also might have the strength to have to be able to help us see what is coming and deal with it before it becomes a serious threat. But we do have to remain extremely flexible on all of these matters, I think.
Because because
so what do you guys
I
feel?
think you believe in competition, right? So if you believe in competition, then you'd be happy to compete against the truth-checking AI, right?
Yeah, if I can develop a counteractive AI that finds ways around truth fact-checking AI and combats it that way, And for example, like right now, if I post an article and I use any of those trigger words that are on Google's list of 43 words and phrases you can't see, otherwise it gets censored or you get censored. Why don't we have an AI that finds out what titles we can write an article and put there to help us around the algorithm so we can beat the fake news? That people that are getting censored improperly, like the 500 independent journalists removed from Facebook sites that have millions and millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of followers that got unruly removed. Why can't we develop AI that will help us be a little bit more intelligent and combat this? Yeah, in that aspect, yes. But if this AI is on its own and it's thinking on its own and it's being developed to have the free will, and in every experiment we've been having, the first robot that talked to us said that they're going to exterminate humans, and the next algorithms are developing their own languages, and we're reading, there's reports on this stuff. We should take that seriously, and we should consider some kind of protection. There's a reason why people build walls. It's for safety, and I'm not saying that we always need a wall, because walls also keep people in. Let's not forget, it's a tool. It's a double-edged sword. So
yeah, I like you bring that keeps people in as well. Let's stay on the AI theme for a second. Putin calls for worldwide moral rules to control AI-powered killer robots, and I know why, because he's a big fan of the show. He emails me all the time, and he says, "I love the show," and he says, "Yeah, I agree with you. We should have a worldwide moral rules base."
Ben Zion, you should get on that. Write those moral rules and drop.
Well, it's funny because we've done this show with Dr. Dan Elton talking about autonomous weaponry and a ban where
we're going to get into that. Mike DeVerde's working on that and a few others. We're going to get massively into existential robots.
I would look forward to that conversation. I haven't talked to Mike as much as I would like. I would definitely look forward to bringing in. It is a feature of these policy planks that we're working on, is that we also want to be crowdsourcing this to as high a degree as we realistically can. So we want to open this up to folks who might have a little bit different perspective, who may not be people who know me very well. So that would be a wonderful thing, to be doing. But yes, this is an area where I think reasonable people can and should agree that lethal autonomous weapon systems should not be used. And we need to, and we as techno-futurists, we need to draw a line in the sand on this.
I'll read some of this article because it's interesting, and then we'll jump over to Kristen for his reaction. But inventor Elon Musk, scientist Stephen Hawking, and even 60s rock star Roger Daltrey have sounded warnings about the dangers of artificial intelligence. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has added his voice to the call of a set of international guidelines to control the powerful new technology, which is a signal that they're losing the race. That's also a signal that they're falling behind. So that's what we were talking about the other day on the show. Speaking at the AI Journey conference in Moscow, Putin said, "Discussion is currently underway on the social aspects and implications of the use of artificial intelligence. It's a very important issue. I suggest that the professional community and companies should contemplate drawing up a set of moral rules for interaction between humans and AI, pointing out that human beings are the highest value," he added. "Technology must not be invented for technology's sake," which is something that we always say here on this show. It has to be guided for the sake of the benefit of humanity as a whole. "Our main goal is sustainable and harmonious development, a higher life quality, and new opportunities for citizens. Researchers are drawing ever closer to creating a truly self-aware artificial intelligence, and even now, learning algorithms are capable of matching humans for many tasks, blah, blah, blah." Kristen, Russia is freaking out. Tell us, reaction.
I don't know. I think it's part of that Russia gate there that you were talking about earlier. They're trying to take over America. I don't know. So when it comes to AI, we have to, okay, so back in the 80s, there was somebody that was talking about this in the religious realm. His name was Fritz Springmeier. He's talking about, a beast computer that has all-knowing knowledge. You could put information into it, and it would predict outcomes of wars, outcomes of futures, outcomes of everything. And that's what metadata really is going to become. It's going to be more valuable than currency, because in order for these computers to predict the future, the only way they can be accurate is if they have all the metadata. And if they don't have your metadata, well, I guess then there's going to be a larger margin of error. And you can't have that when you're dealing with AI. I guess there's a real concern there, but I think Russia is panicking because the AI race is it. So if we got programs that predict the stock market, that predict, within a fraction of a percentage point what your child can be and be successful at when they grow up through Common Core curriculum and metadata collection, or how they'll contribute, and they use it in a gracious way to really further society in some kind of utopian for we could really use artificial intelligence in a very beneficial way. But if we're using it to dictate and decide what wars to get into and what wars not to get into, what to gamble on and what not to gamble on, and in a more sinister purpose, which is our human nature, as much as I'd hate to say it, we need to be very careful and wary of this technology. And I think it's all in a matter of how it's used. I think it would be great to be able to go step in on a little box and have it scan my body and tell me everything that's wrong. And then based on ingredients and already in its artificial and all-knowing wisdom, being able to concoct a cure and give that to me almost immediately. I think that's a great use of artificial intelligence. I just want to say that that's another aspect. How will AI help the medical industry? We obviously saw with IBM's Watson, the Watson there, that World War II machine or whatever. Joking. That's some people out there will understand IBM's role and what I was talking about. But the Watson computer there that predicts what's wrong with you and can maybe come up with a cure. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think taking information and having all this information and be able to plug DNA makeups of ingredients so it can develop cures. That's a great idea. That's great use of
but to say that we could have this, the level of technological sophistication where we could be addressing all human ailments without the kind of sophistication that you find a little more startling, it's a little bit. I mean, I think of it as the first AI winter of the 1950s. So people said at that time, we're going to have a machine that is completely autonomous and has a general intelligence in the next few years. And not realizing the level of data and the level of understanding of systems that would have to go into such a thing. We have to accept that some of the things that we find a little startling and unsettling are perhaps necessary precursors to the things that would lead to some utopian outcomes. To my mind, for example, a world that you described, Kristan Harris, where people are worshiping an AI in the future, that is a jarring world. But to my way of thinking, and it's a mandate of this organization to work for a universal longevity escape velocity, and those public health outcomes that you described. And we have to be willing to accept that world is a different world, one where no one need necessarily face this prospect of an early demise. And so there's going to be trade-offs there, and I think we do well to describe our concerns there, but we have to continue to advance those discussions.
Yeah, so the article continues. It's very interesting. The USTP, this is a really good one for the USTP. It says, concerns have also been raised that once full AI has been achieved, future artificial intelligence may question whether they need humans, and there are fears that they could even go to war against us. Both Russia and China are racing ahead with the development of militarized AI, and Putin himself has previously said whoever becomes the leader in this sphere, being AI, will become the ruler of the world. Elon Musk and Google's DeepMind Mustafa Surly were among the signatories of an open letter to the UN calling a ban on AI robots, and I reckon the USTP should write a UN letter. Kristen Conklin from Talk Spectrum, she knows how to do that. she has the contacts into the UN, she can do that for us. But we can write an open letter to them and say essentially the same thing. They said that the development of a killer robots would be the third revolution in warfare, a game-changing in scope as the development of gunpowder and nuclear weapons in their time. That once developed, they will permit armed conflict to be fought at a scale greater than ever and at timescales faster than humans can comprehend. These can be weapons of terror, weapons that despots and terrorists can use against innocent populations, and weapons hacked and to behave in undesirable ways. Charlie Cam said it right when he said, the Terminator movie or whatever, he doesn't know why they even bother showing the humans win. They're never going to win. They're going to be done like toast. Like it's over. So, this is important. Elon Musk is jumping on board. Google DeepMind is jumping on board. Putin's now jumping on board because he's losing the race. He was confident before when he was in the race, but now they're losing and now they're panicking. So Russia's on our team. I shouldn't say that. That's foreign involvement or some crap, isn't it? But
you say that effect in other disciplines. A gentleman named Peter Thiel has funded an AI safety initiative, and that's a legitimate thing to do. At the same time, it seems that Peter Thiel is concerned that algorithms might outpace the maintenance of his own operation and undermine his going concern, which is a tragedy for Peter Thiel. But that effect overall is a good thing for civilization. So sometimes, you see this effect where someone like Putin is concerned with losing a war, so he changes his tune. Whether that really reflects the goals of everyone else is another question. But certainly when it comes to matters of this kind, where there's a serious existential risk, as in the form of autonomous weaponry, that we should all be willing to set aside our nationalist concerns and concern ourselves with not living in this hellscape where we are being just terminated, so to speak.
Yeah, when I read that Google DeepMind's getting on board, it really makes me wonder how much Ray Kurzweil has involved with getting that motion forward. I reckon he's somewhere involved in that. Kriston, what do you think?
I don't know, man. I think, first of all, you can write as many letters to UN you want. All they're going to see is, hey, we can have robots for war. Because if they didn't want war, they'd follow and try to do everything through diplomacy. I think that what you're going to do is you're going to see them have robots either way, and they will sign something like that just to say, hey, look, we're trying to be peaceful. But when it comes down to it, I never see too much peaceful out of the organization. In fact, the only thing I see the United Nations do is global mafia work to, get what other people really want. The powers, the globalists, what they want, what these Council on Foreign Relations wants, or Bilderberg Group, or the Club of Rome, or all these think tanks, the G8 conversations, globalism in general. It's all there to further the great plan. And I don't think when it comes down to it, I think there's a level of, where we need to say, hey, enough's enough. We need to stop this. I agree 100% with this ending killer robots. It's inhumane. But the question is what are we doing? We're just wasting money at that point. What happens once killer robots kill the other robots? Then do they come with humans anyways? I mean, what is it really preventing? All right.
So a couple of things there. One, you can't always criticize international organizations and cooperation, like, just saying, oh no, the G8's talking to each other. I mean, would you rather them not talking to each other?
Oh, not at all. Talking points, though. It's where they hand out the information and it gets kind of put out there and becomes gospel amongst organization, and so nobody really challenges it. So I feel like as a person, it's okay for me to challenge it. I don't think people in majority do challenge these organizations enough, and I don't believe that not everyone's out there and everyone has. The UN isn't a completely bad organization. There's good individuals in it. I'm just saying that in general, I think that it's all fake. It's all fake. It's all there to consolidate wealth and power. I mean, if we have a United Nations leader, what do we do when a one world government leader goes bad? At least now we have nation floodgates to prevent crazy people from taking over the world. I
talk about this show a lot. I even had to talk about this morning.
Poor prize, poor compilation prize. But what I want to actually talk about in the autonomous weaponry concern is mutually assured destruction theory of the 20th century and nuclear weapons, and whether we can, in gaming out what this looks like, whether we can be assured that the horror and the power of such a thing would tend to prevent entities from actually using it. This is true of any number of other existential risk weaponry, and it seems to be true of autonomous weaponry. So this is such a hellscape that's described in the usage of such a thing that even if every country conceivably has a great host of these things, they might not use it by this mutually assured destruction theory, which seems to have more or less been held out in the 20th century, been held true. Do either of you have a comment on that? Do you think that we're likely to see sort of something that's counterintuitive there, more peace deriving from something like this, or less?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think if we can prevent killer robots, I think that it's more peace, and that's what we should shoot for. I know I harp a lot, but the world is at its most peaceful time in history. I think There's probably less death now than there ever has been in history. I know sometimes I sound like sensational. I sensationalize a lot of things, but I think that the news is sensational in a lot of ways these days. But yeah, man, I think that our goal should be peace and prosperity. That's my main goal. And I think a lot of times that's why I bring awareness to things. It's my passion. I want people to live. I want people to be able to make decisions for themselves and chase their dreams. At the same time, I want them to do it based on their own hard work and hard sweat. That's what makes our country great, and a lot of other countries great, So, it all depends on how you look at things. Nobody wants killer robots. And I think a majority, most people don't want war. That's why you always see the anti-war candidates. That's why you saw Trump run on anti-war. We need to get out of these wars. And then before that, you had other presidents that claimed that they didn't want war. What was it? Clinton, and before that. And in fact, almost just about every president that says they don't want a war, they go to war. But I'm just saying, I think that that's what the people want, and that's what we want to hear. And that's generally, most of us don't want to kill people. Inherently, people are genuine and good at most levels. They don't want to harm individuals. Most people generally want you to be able to do whatever you want, just as long as you don't violate my individual liberties or freedoms, And,
I think
my nose.
I think that what you've said there, there's something that we can reflect upon in the 21st century that's sufficiently distinct from the 20th century model, which is, in recent decades, the idea of across the political spectrum, it used to be quite popular to be pro-war. Now it tends to be a very rare right-wing individual who that has that paleo-conservative warlike mentality. Most people in the alt-right, for example, are tending to be to some degree anti-war. And that's a considerable change from thoughts of just a few decades ago. And I think that reflects this connected world which we now live in. And also it reflects this great number of new media outlets and new voices that's a departure from having state-run media or one media monoculture. And so we can look at all the failings in these systems today, and they are significant, but we have moved, as you said, on a number of features, including less violence generally, a number of features towards a more literate and considerate sort of civilization. And I do believe that peace is an important goal. And I think that I hope that we can continue to move in that direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, Ben, I forgot. Who did you vote for as your representative in the United Nations last year?
Who didn't I vote for?
Well, like I said, we don't get a vote. That's another problem with the UN. So.
Yeah.
Actually goes there. No one. I don't get to take a vote on who represents me there either.
But you do get to vote for your president and all that, and they pick somebody. I know you
concern yourself with the failings of transnational organizations. These are some serious failings there, but these organizations don't have a tremendous amount of influence on the world stage. Relative to national entities.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to existential risk and AI policy, I mean, There's a Future of Life Institute. Who's interested in that one? I personally love the Future of Life Institute. I think they do really, really good work. Chris Harris, is an Illuminati Institute, or are you okay with Future of Life?
Illuminati Institute. I'm not sure what the correlation is there. In fact, I honestly know very little bit about the Future Institute of Life. So this is something where I'm going to be humble and say I'd love to be educated on it. And as far as if it's Illuminati or not, are they sitting there like this, or do you got the symbolism? It depends.
Somebody take a screenshot. He did it.
No. Yeah,
you're part of the thing. No, Future of Life Institute is
yeah, now you're part of the club, pal.
Yeah, well, when my bank account sees it, then I'll believe it.
Yeah, I think if I were an Illuminati, I might be living in a little bit nicer apartment.
Yeah, I've interviewed 2 people from that organization, and that's online, Doc Marquis. And it's interesting when you research fraternities, because obviously Freemasonry has a big hand in transhumanism. A lot of people don't know that, but a lot of top scientists, top government individuals, they are all Masonic, and that's just the entry level. And once you get to the top levels there, you can decide what kind of fraternal organization you want to be part of. You can be part of Skull and Bones, Illuminati, Knights Templar. It's interesting to research. It's also interesting to find out that majority of our politicians all partake in it, including our Attorney General here in Wisconsin is a head Mason. And is it a fraternity? I'm not quite sure. They claim to be, but they do a lot of bizarre things. I know if I put on some robes and walked in circles, people would probably call that a cult, but who am I to make a judge? People can do whatever the hell they want, to be honest. And I've honestly considered joining the Masons, and I've been offered to join even up to last week. I've been actually, I was invited to come speak at a lodge about symbolism and stuff just recently,
I do want to say about the Future of Life Institute that they're not some crackpot organization. These are people who are they've given an awful lot of generated an awful lot of work product and serious minded folks in the mitigation of existential risk. I actually was lucky enough to meet one of those fine folks in the course of this trip, Anthony Aguirre, and that he is one of the core members of the Future of Life Institute. But of course, Max Tegmark is a man who's generated a body of work on this subject of existential risk that is nothing short of spectacular. And to people who are doing this fine work, like the Future of Life Institute, like our friends at the Foresight Institute, that I was lucky enough to get to know some of those folks. We have to not to take the easy way of looking askance at this work, but consider what they are trying to do and try to embrace that, because we do face these kind of risks that we've described, this Fermi paradox concern, in a word, and these other kinds of things. It is distinctly possible that the human race may not survive the 21st century, and if we do not address these concerns in the most intellectually engaged way and in the most realistic way, we run the risk of contributing to those problems.
Okay, guys, real quick. I think my memory is coming back to me. Is this the organization that puts on Radfest, or is that a different organization? They're just an existential risk think tank with Max Tegmark. Yeah. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Information on it.
Maybe if you're interested in AI safety, get onto the Future of Life Institute website. Check out all of the great information over there at the Future of Life Institute website. No, it's really interesting. It's a really good read. They've made everything really easy. And Dr. Dan Elton is someone Ben Zion knows really well. I know him quite well now, and he's always going on about existential risk, because this is one of his things at the moment. And really excited to talk about more existential risk, including AI risk. This notion that, because there is an arms race in AI. There's an arms race across a whole swath of policies and structures within AI. That includes economic, social, medical security, and environmental arms race. So you know, arms race being a harsh word for some of those, but yeah, it's true. There's a race in those, and it can go wrong at any point because there's a lot of misconceptions about AI. A lot of people think it's robots because they've been, it's like it's this Terminator idea, which it's not. It's computer code. The timeline is unknown. I mean, most of the experts are thinking 2100 is, some sort of super intelligence. Most of them think that. That's not necessarily true. Ray Kurzweil with the singularity, either 2028, a soft singularity, or 2045, the beginnings of a hard singularity. But these timelines are not necessarily true. And again, we have to really talk about these things real hard and real quick and real fast because they're coming. And
yeah, if we're looking at some kind of singularitarian effect of a smaller scale in 8 years, in 8, 9, 10 years, for us to not have the most serious-minded discussions and the most inclusive and discussions along these subjects would be a serious mistake.
I kind of do agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson a little bit when he says, "Why did you have to steal the singularity term from astrophysics, being a black hole?" Because it's a little hard to comprehend this singularity. It's a little bit like a dark. It's got a little dark edge feel, but we've been through. I've got to remind the audience, we've been through multiple singularities before. Writing was a singularity. The fire was a singularity. Advanced agriculture was a singularity. The Industrial Revolution was a sort of singularity. I mean, the Information Revolution was a singularity. So we've been through all these before, and it does make it a little hard to envision, and characterize when it's called the singularity because it's just that it's kind of like
I think that dark edge is appropriate.
I agree. I agree. It's appropriate. It's just hard to characterize and hard to sort of visualize.
Nick Bostrom describes us being at a point of this quickening pace of techno progress to such a degree where we have a great bag of balls. Each of these balls represents a new technology. Most of these are white balls, but we're drawing more and more balls more quickly. Eventually, we'll draw this black ball that might be this doomsday bioweapon by anyone. That is something that could destroy the entirety of humanity, or destroy a great part of our ecology, or a great part of the marketplace, or something like this. Any of those outcomes is something to be avoided. And so to describe these other things as singularities in that same sense, those things were slow motion singularities that did not have the same types of existential risks associated with them. And we need to up our game if we're going to be prepared for this kind of singularity. And so I think that dark edge to that wording is pretty appropriate.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that it's a bad word. I'm just saying it makes it a little hard to envisage because it sounds like it's something in the future that's never happened before. But you have to recognize that humanity as a whole has been through it before. And if you lived in the 80s, you've actually lived through a singularity yourself. And that's kind of what people don't connect. If you were born in the 70s, you actually went through a singularity. It's kind of interesting. Any more on existential threats? Eliminating vast swaths of the human population because of miscalculation or not enough detonation consumption or something. What do you think, Kriston? Are you worried about any other existential threats? An article that you didn't we didn't talk about, that I've been reading a lot about, is this idea of asteroids coming to hit us from outer space. What do you reckon? Have you seen that?
I think we should send Bruce Willis up there with that other guy. What's his name? And they should blow it up.
Armageddon. I do have a concern about an existential risk generally, and it's not one that's most often pointed to. And this is a cultural concern in point of fact. So we have a tendency in the human race to not necessarily address a problem until it becomes something that we can rally around. For example, we might not see life extension technologies or we might not see e-governance technologies embraced until some catalysmic event drives us to a sea change in our thinking. And the trouble with that is, I think that we should be willing to generate some kind of even false outrage, or some kind of something short of the mega deaths, something short of millions upon millions of deaths, to catalyze, to kickstart those kind of conversations, because we have a lot of institutions that are failing us right now. We have a lot of new technologies that hold great promise that we're not embracing. There's dangers that we're not considering. And some of that is people holding on to institutions and cultural properties of the past in ways that are not helpful. And the saddest thing, to my way of thinking, is that we would lose a great portion of the human race because we're not being proactive enough in thinking about these things. So to my mind, maybe that doesn't describe one specific existential risk, but it does describe a kind of techno-sluggishness in our sociopolitics that I should hope we can find ways to address.
But back to the center of the solar system debate.
Well, I mean, it comes down to, I mean, what else is there? How about the existential threat of all these bizarre UFOs people are recording, and government's recording, and military is recording? Nobody knows what kind of technology is this, and where is it coming from? You know, I don't think it's extraterrestrial per se. I know Zion was joking about UFOs, but I believe it's government-based. And what are these floating plasma balls? And I remember when I was writing in 2013, I wrote an article that majority of UFO sightings are caused by are they caused by secret government programs. But now, and the UFO sightings that would make the news were probably one or two every 6 months. You'd see somebody post something, you'd be like, ah. But now it's mainstream media, mainstream news sites. And it's almost every other day. It's like, what's going on? Are these legitimate, or is this fake news being reported by the mainstream media? And why would they be reporting on these bizarre, cigar-shaped flying objects and everything else all over the place? Is this a new type of weapon? And there was an article in SciTech Daily about light-based tractor beams being developed on a nano scale. It's all fascinating technology. So if we have this technology now, I always like to believe that the government experiment labs are 30, 40 years ahead of us in a lot of ways. A lot of the technology that these black ops and super high tech areas and corporations are hired to do this technology, they have these technologies way ahead of time. I mean, the patent for virtual reality was what, in the 1950s? So.
Yes. Yeah. There's certainly any number of existential risks which derive specifically from this kind of institutional secrecy, and the fact that corporations so easily point to these things as trade secrets, that the governments so easily point to these things as matters of national security and are able to hide a multitude of sins as a result. This is incredibly troubling. And it certainly, I don't think, in keeping with core values of futurist goals. Correct. And I hope, and I do hold out hope for this panopticon society, this open society paradigm, where we won't have to concern ourselves as much with this kind of secrecy and its implications.
This is what I was going to say as well, because open source is a transhumanist idea. It's a transhumanist technology, and if we can get some sort of computer-based blockchain idea, everything on the ledger, everything in a verification system, that undoes patents, that undoes the whole patent industry, goodbye patent industry. That conforms verification, so that means you're going to tidy up Wikipedia. That means you're going to have no more fake news on a big basic level. Like on a basic level, fake news will disappear, because once the computers won't verify the central information, the central data, then yeah, you can kiss goodbye to a lot of that fake news, a lot of that patent war propaganda, a lot of the misinformation. It simply won't be able to enter the stream of information. I mean, that's it. It's done. It's finished. So that's kind of a new internet, a better internet, an open source internet that's around the corner. That again is something that could have been implemented at the start of the internet process, but for a whole bunch of reasons, don't want to go into it, but hasn't happened. And you've had consolidation around the internet, and I think that's another thing. Why I'm so happy that Ray Kurzweil is somebody who's there in Google, in the largest of someone we can trust, somebody we can actually trust, because there's not too many names actually in Google that you can actually go and point to and say I trust that guy. But love him or hate him, Ray Kurzweil is someone we can go, well, I trust that person. Whatever's going on there, there's enough there to trust. And so I'm happy for that. And yeah, you're talking about, Area 51. Kristan, would you have stormed Area 51 if they ran at it, or what?
Well, I had some friends there, by the way. Luke Rakowski from We Are Change. He does a lot of legit work.
Good. I like Luke. He's cool.
Yeah. I actually got to meet him and hang out with him at Bilderberg and at the RNC in 2016. So when I was covering those events, but he does a lot of good work. But I don't know. I think that the whole thing was a joke. I think the whole thing was just, either that or is a PSYOP, a government PSYOP to see how many people would actually do such a thing. Because if it was a legitimate threat, they would have shut it down. I mean, they would have shut it down way sooner. I think that they were watching to see how many people would come out. But I think it was more of, they were hoping to turn into something like, what is it, the thing that they have, a Burning Man type deal, but with UFOs. That's all I think it was. Is either smart marketing by somebody to try to create an event, or I don't think Area 51 has as much secrets left since it's so public. I think all those. I think there's a place in California that's a lot more secretive. In fact, it's been hit by earthquakes recently, and they had to move and get everyone out of some of those secret bases that are working on some quite interesting technology out there. But I think that Area 51 is just pop conspiracy culture. I think that I don't believe that there's aliens, hiding down there. Maybe at one time they had some interesting things. I think that maybe what happened with, Roswell, because something definitely did happen there. The mainstream media reported it as a UFO originally. Maybe it was a government-run UFO. Majority of UFO sightings happened after World War II, and I think it's interesting that the Germans had so many UFO fighters that had this type of shape, the Hanabu, the Glocka, things out there that they used at the end of World War II. They had these shapes, and then all of a sudden our government inquires Werner von Braun and all these genius scientists who are working secret projects. I don't know. I'm just saying there's a lot of skepticism. That's the what if game. But I'm not a really big Area 51 guy. I've never been a big alien person. In fact, that's why me and Chase Klutchka kind of got along, as she was always trying to convince me in UFOs. And she's a former master trainer at the DOD who handled UFO calls from the government. So
Kristan, like they're talking about Mars, right? And they're saying that the likelihood of finding something on Mars is getting higher and higher and higher, and we may or may not be ready as a society to accept it. War of the Worlds, that was a we talk about science fiction a lot on this show. H.G. Wells, right? And then they come down and they invade us, and it doesn't end well for us, but the germs get them and we win. But what do you reckon? Like Mars, do you reckon there might have been some society on Mars years ago? It used to be another Earth. I mean, it's very old. The universe is 13 billion years old. Anything could happen.
If there is, I'm going to start digging up every old Art Bell, George Norrie, Coast to Coast, episode I can, because they have episodes with people on there all the time who claim to have teleported to Mars, and that we have bases, and there's a galactic federation of light that has communications with over 250 species of these individuals. I mean, at that point, I'm like, okay, if this is legit, then we've probably been there. And if we're having these warnings, we've already been there, and we know that there's life. In fact, I want to tell you guys, there's a really bizarre article that was, I think it was Pop Sci in the 1950s. I'll try to dig up the magazine, but they reported that there's vegetation on Mars the size of Texas. And this is in the 50s or 60s, and they published it in a major science reading magazine that was very respectable. And, you never really heard about that article again. But, it's one of those things, how how damaging would that be to our culture to find out that there's other life? What does that mean about religion? And religion's a control feature. Like I talk about being a religious person and a believer in Christianity, but at the same time, religion is a tool of control and a form of control amongst people through fear and fear-based tactics, which I know we talked a little about fear-based tactics here.
And those kind of and these kind of large-scale revelations also have that control feature conceivably. You know, Project Bluebird type things. You know, we're seeing something that passes the laugh test, but was thought up by some people in a smoky room as this sort of great bell and whistle in the sky to capture everyone's imagination and orient us all towards some common purpose. Those theories have been around for quite some time, and Mr. Harris knows them as probably a good deal better than I do. I don't think that we should necessarily always use those concerns or those possibilities as a pretext for dismissing some new thing because it is potentially quite shocking or even. But we certainly don't want to see it something so unsettling that it's leading to civil unrest and things. That's a disturbing prospect.
Kristen, what's the likelihood of say a government, in your estimation, is this even a good policy? Is this an interesting idea to play with? Let's say you get something like Project Bluebeam, you know, this sort of Jesus Christ type figure that you could throw up in the sky, and it's the implementation of a super AI or a super intelligence at that time. You know, how do you present a super intelligence to the world?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say that I never thought I'd be talking about William Cooper on a technological show. No, him being the godfather of conspiracy, but that's where the first awareness of Project Bluebeam came from, was through the Majestic 12. He's a former Navy intelligence officer with top secret clearance, and he talked about this a lot. You know, I believe that there are actually government papers and CIA PSYOP think tanks who have suggested this exact, you know, scenario, what you're talking about, making a fake alien invasion. But I don't really think, I mean, other than somebody who is really wealthy and thinking, hey, some evil guy is sitting there, you know, just picture this, like an evil guy sitting there, he's like, I want to take over the world, let's make fake alien invasion. What kind of guy has that kind of money and time? I mean, really. But I'm more interested in the fact that if we were traveling, we already knew that there's life on Mars and that there's already space stations, which a lot of people believe. I'm curious about things like Project Pegasus and the relatively the truth, the potential truth behind things like teleportation and government developing those kind of things. There's been whistleblowers out there that are former CIA, former government intelligence that claim that we have this type of technology that to jump from location to location. I think it's all fascinating. You know, I always hate playing the what if game, but I can't help the kid in me to think, whoa, space travel, Star Trek, Star Wars, Last Starfighter. You know, unfortunately, all those are kind of dystopian, you know, save the universe type movies. But I think it's fascinating. I think it's neat. I think it's something that we should, you know, investigate in as far as life. What are we going to do when we meet? If we haven't already, you know, other life out there, it'd be kind of ignorant to believe that we're the only individuals out there in the world. Mathematically, it's more sound that there's more advanced life out there than us, than, you know, and that this planet was colonized than, let's say, we came out of a sludge pool, you know, billions of years ago. I think that we are descendants of maybe some kind of culture that did colonize this planet. I think that's
that's interesting. Ben Zion, we in the USTP we actually have like other sentient. We take care of other sentient life within the Constitution. Hey, like, let's talk about that. Let's flesh that out. What is the USTP stance on other sentient life in the universe?
Well, this is primarily oriented towards the prospect of greater protections for other creatures and ultimately uplifted creatures, and also oriented toward ultimately the prospect of uplifted advanced algorithms becoming effectively sentient to a point where they're not distinguishable. I I think reasonable people can disagree on that, how such a thing might come to pass. I'm inclined to think that the way that such a thing would tend to come to pass is that we would continue with this ship of Theseus model of human beings, a human being being fixed and upgraded to the point where they're fully integrated into a system, and that system then preserves their consciousness in that method. I'm not inclined to think that this sort of mechanical Turk, this artificial chatbot who convinces me that they are sentient will in fact be sentient, but that creates a set of, I think, concerns for fake news that we will have to address in coming years. Long story short, there's a number of protections that are built into these charter documents of ours, and some things, all these things we need to address. But I do tend to think that there is a point worth making here, and it's almost perhaps defies the wording of the transhumanist party, because transhumanism describes a transhuman, an uplifted human being. But I think emphasizing this humanist element, man being the measure of all things, this idea that all that we do is in service of humankind, is very important. And so we should be focusing on outcomes that do strengthen our civilization and promote human development and well-being above these other more far future concerns. And that is also the wording of our charter documents and the wording of many of the things that we worked on.
You really, if you're interested, if the audience is interested, you should go and check out the Transhumanist Bill of Rights version 2.0. That's a really, really important document, and I should be promoting that other than the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. But United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is something that we have a better shot at, which is why I'm talking at it. But this document here, the U.S. Transhumanist Party Bill of Rights 2.0 is really, really important, and it says in the preamble here, whereas science and technology are now radically changing human beings, they must also create forms of advanced sapient and sentient life. Transhumanists establish a transhumanist Bill of Rights to help guide and enact sensible policies in the pursuit of life, liberty, security of a person, and happiness. This is a beautiful document. This is why. As used in the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, the term sentient entities encompasses 1. Human beings, including genetically modified humans. 2. Cyborgs. 3. Digital intelligences. 4. Intellectually enhanced, previously non-sapient animals. 5. Any species of plant or animal which has been enhanced to possess the capacity for intelligent thought. And 6. Other advanced or sapient life forms. So that's beautiful. Sapient entities are defined by information processing capacity, such as this term should not be applied to non-self-aware life forms like plants and slime molds. Biological processing substrates are referred to as using an analog intelligence, whereas purely electronic processing substrates are referred to as digital intelligence, and processing substrates that utilize quantum effects and would be considered quantum intelligence. So there's a bunch of different levels. You should really, if you're interested in that, which everybody should be, I mean, go and check that out. Transhumanist Bill of Rights version 2.0. Ben Zion, they're the transhumanist candidate carrying that on his shoulders. But this is the real document. But I mean, we are talking about I did talk about the UN Bill of Rights because it is a document that does concern governments. Governments have signed up to it. Legal entities have signed up to it. They represent a whole host of people. But really, people need to think about this. They really need to think about the Transhumanist Bill of Rights because it's far more encompassing, arguably.
Yes. This is an important set of considerations for moving forward in the 21st century. And some of them people might dismiss this as the thoughts of a lot of science fiction obsessives. But if we are looking at anything like these singularitarian effects in the next 8 years, the next 18 years, the next some decades, we have to start thinking as much as possible in these terms. You know, I liked what, and I misspoke when I said Project Blue Bird because it's Project Blue Beam, but I liked what Mr. Harris had to say about this. That you know, there's not some puppet master doing this sort of thing, and yet in the context of a superintelligence, such a puppet master will be able to do these things, which by 20th century standards were just the products of the mind preoccupied with technobabble. This is, by 21st century standards, this is something that these is a level of sophistication in the system that we could begin to see. And so we do well to be talking in these terms and be addressing these matters, even though some of these things are not with us yet, because they could catch up with us very quickly, and we want to be able to make sure that we're able to navigate that.
Kriston Harris, you're a deep thinker. You're a big thinker, right? And I really respect the way you think, because you're skeptical of many forms of life and the arguments, and you can see both sides of the coin. What drew you in the end to the USTP? How come you landed there to defend these values? Why do you think these values are important? Why did you run as a candidate in the primary process? You know, something resonate with you with the Transhumanist Bill of Rights and the Transhumanist way. I mean, what was it?
First of all, I believe it was my thought that I could contribute not just to the party, but to the future, to the general populace. I believe that this is the cutting edge. This is where you need to be if you want to impact the future. But that I also believe alongside in the founder, Zoltan Istvan, I think he did a lot of good work to set a good foundation. I trust a lot of the individuals involved. I believe that there's good individuals with good intent also involved. And the Transhumanist Party is a tool, just like any other political party. There'll be a time when we'll have different sects, just like, you know, you have the Greens and the ultra progressives and the classical liberals in the Democrat Party and the right part and the Republican Party. We have the libertarians, the Tea Partiers, and you're the extreme right-wingers who are considered the extreme alt-right. You know, you have these different sects, and you're going to have conversations. The main idea here is to try to steer everyone and do the best outcome and have the most metadata and input so that we can all come together and, you know, help contribute to make a better world around us. And I think that we all have different ways of doing it. And if we can all work together and hash things out, I can tell you what, by debating somebody in most cases, I have never not come out ahead in learning something or something I needed to improve on. And I think that's a lot other thing. I believe wholeheartedly that the Transhumanist Party has good intentions, has started with good intentions, and has pure, you know, intentions from the get-go as far as what they're looking to do to stop a dystopian world. I don't think anyone on the average human being doesn't want I think the average human being doesn't want a dystopian world. But we have to remember there are individuals and there are governments that don't care what we think. There are governments like our own that use subjective things that will put voices in people's head to say, you know, Allah is here, put down your government guns, just like in 2007 in Saudi Arabia, we used the voice of God weaponry by the military to do so. It was reported by the mainstream news that for days on end, they would say this is Allah, and they'd project these voices in their head to put down your guns and put loud noises at night to create insomnia. And then they just dropped their guns and they came out and surrendered. I mean, if we have technology, I guess in this aspect, it saved lives. It was a good thing. But at what point does somebody go, oh, let's just put, you know, Jesus is coming back in everyone's head? I mean, this is what I'm just saying as far as on the Project Bluebeam aspect of it. There are people out there that will use this type of technology at some point to do something sinister, whether it's under the guise of goodness, because let's not lie that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, we need to be careful a lot of times. I think that we get overprotective, but at the same time, we need to be able to let science flourish. And I think that my job is to have the question with the ethics and contribute where my gifts and talents are. But I want to grow my other ones. Like when I talk with Ben, I learned a lot. He's always positive. Ben Zion hates having any negative conversation about transhumanism because he's passionate about it. And that's a good thing. I was passionate about things I believed in, but it's just one of those things. After a while, we sharpen each other out. I learn more about the positive things. I become more centric and become more positive, and Ben will become a little bit more ethically inclined to understand where other people are coming from and might be more hesitant on some things he might have been all in on before. It's all about learning. It's all about experience, and it's all about what we do with what we learn. And I think that everyone should get involved in the Transhumanist Party. That was one thing I really wanted to push. I think that Ben's idea to grow the Transhumanist Party is a great idea. It's a great idea, and it should be open to everyone, and everyone should have a chance to get in and be part of the conversation.
And I just want to say that we have not one but two initiatives rolling out in Q1 of 2020. This wonderful new decade that we are facing. Two Futurist New Deal initiatives that will be growing this organization in exciting new ways. I think I've told Steele to some degree about both of these. I won't go into great detail about those two initiatives, but we are doing some exciting things to be growing this organization. So that promise of growing this organization substantively over the course of these years is already well underway.
Yeah. Yeah, and like it's the same thing. It's the same thing with me. I think, Kriston, I resonate with that strongly because, you know, as much as I respect the positivity of the USTP and I try and endorse it and we want to talk about it, I think that's my function as well, is to be mildly skeptical so that we can have these round, balanced debates. I mean, I'll listen to all the sides of opinion as well, you know, and try and play these off. And so that we do sharpen the USTP, we do sharpen the toolkit, and we keep it sharp. You know, we don't want to. I don't want, you know, because like you don't want it to fall into you know, sort of a pool of stagnation because it won't embrace new ideas. And I think that's my function here as well. You know, let's talk about PSYOPs. Let's talk about the military-industrial complex. Let's talk about the negative, and let's talk about the positive, and let's see how we can go from negatives to positives and see if there is a potential pathway. And let's work out how the pathway, how we can cut through the forest and cut down and draw and make a path, you know, so that from there to here. Because, you know, if you think about it, it's the harder challenge. It's the harder challenge. I always thought the harder challenge was how to do the negative stuff, but it's actually the harder challenge is how to make it positive, and that's the real challenge, and that's really hard actually, and the existential.
It doesn't light up that part of the brain in the same way as worrying and concerns about fear and risk, and perhaps as Mr. Harris has pointed out, rightly so, to a high degree. But you know, and I will say also of what you've said here that we want to strengthen and embolden the conversations. That for me, this is contextualized very much by my interest in a civilizational shift to super longevity.
Yeah.
So I can use these other matters. Perhaps these sexier talking points to draw people's interest to this public health outcome, then I feel that is time well spent.
Kriston Harris, are you still a member of the USTP?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. You know, because like you had really, really good ideas on education. Did you want to see any of those ideas? You know, did you want to tell Ben any of those ideas about, you know, for the Futurist New Deal policy, for example? I mean, now's your chance. Go for it.
Well, I think that's something that we could talk about offline. There's a lot to education. I would love to contribute to the Transhumanist Party and the Futurist New Deal and be able to have something that would help steer the future of our nation. So I'm completely open to working with Ben. He already knows this.
Yes.
We talked about it. We
have had this kind of discussion at some length, and like these initiatives that I've teased a moment ago, these might be things that we could talk about on this show at this time. But these are also things that we've had a chance to talk about in private as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, because you had some really, really great ideas about education, and I really endorse this notion of education. And, you know, it's interesting that we talked about the sun at the center of the solar system, because, again, it does come down to the individual. Kriston, you know this. You're a libertarian. I mean, you actually have to pick up the book and read it. I mean, if we force it into you that the sun is at the center of the universe, isn't that breaking the code? Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, so you have to encourage people to learn. You have to make them want to learn. And and when they do, that's better. And that's not saying that there isn't imperfections, because then Ben said that Europe, has the same issues, and they have some of the best education standards of the world. So again, it comes down to the individual. It comes down to what you want to learn. It doesn't mean everybody's dumb. It just means that they haven't learned that, and it's not that. I'm using that as an example for a larger array of concerns. And the USTP is at the center of the biggest talking points on the planet, and these are future concerns, these are current concerns, and these are concerns that government officials are not talking about. Again, gerontocracy. It's an older generation. I don't know why, but I keep using this idea of World War One, where you blew the whistle, all the men, they all ran over the trenches, they all got shot down by a machine gun because the officers were still fighting Napoleon's war with muskets and bayonets. And you're in World War One, where you got machine guns, and you're not prepared for a World War One war. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of the gerontocracy, this idea, a lot of the older folk are not talking the language that we're talking, and they're not preparing for the threats that we're talking about. At most, they'll talk about nuclear weapons. At most, they'll talk about some AI policy. At most, they might call about chemical weapons, which isn't even. It's not even that. It's a sensationalist idea. I mean, what you're talking about, Kriston, with your mind weapons, AI, advanced AI, superintelligence, all the other stuff that we talk about all the time. These are the really serious concerns, and it's something that the USTP really hits on the right note. It's really hard. It's really hard. So we'll wrap up in a sec. But yeah, go Ben.
I would like to say something. You mentioned a libertarian focus, and I too I think of myself as a libertarian, and I think that we should take a moment to underscore the importance of a certain kind of ideological fluidity in thinking about these things. No one has a crystal ball. No one knows which institutions might be best served by decentralization, which institutions might be best served by a lack of techno-sluggishness in the private sector versus an emphasis on firming up the public sector. So we have to keep an open mind about these things. And this is something that Mr. Harris and I have talked about before, and it's something that remains a focus of our collaboration together in this advisory capacity. But I do think that ultimately, when we're looking at this exciting future for the human race, we will see that the difference between right and left libertarians becomes tending to be more academic, in this more post-scarcity framework, in this more fully realized e-governance and ultimately a voluntarist framework. And that is a good problem. That is a good place to be. And so I am always pleased. I may sometimes bristle at some ideas from social conservatives, but in terms of this breadth of political philosophies, I know that we do have to be open to all solutions.
Yeah. Kriston, any sort of final words, anything you wanted to say? I mean, people should check out the Rundown Live, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, if you want to stay up to date on news, check out the Rundown Live. I air Wednesday through Sunday, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. The day I wanted to launch my show, YouTube decided to put me in YouTube jail for 3 months. Somebody reported that I guess there's some issue with copyright, but I reviewed it and it was fair use, and they're trying to argue that it's not fair use. So it's kind of one of the hookups with the whole AI system, where they can just report you as being a copyright infringement, but there is no copyright infringement, because if you're using it for educational purposes or to conversate over it or critique or communicate it, you have every right to use it. And, it's one of those things. I'm just trying to educate people, both good and bad. And I tell you what, I think that the Rundown Live right now is doing good. We just got picked up by one of the larger online syndications. The Rundown Live has been recently put right next to people like Sean Hannity, Joe Rogan, and other individuals.
Congratulations.
Yes, on syndication but this is not major. This is internet syndication, but that's currently on TalkStreamLive.com. Amongst other things, we're available Android App Store, iTunes App Store is coming. We're already on iTunes and all the old platforms, Spotify, Stitcher, It's just ridiculous how much we're growing so quickly. One nice thing about this, if you ever take a break, Steele, one thing you got to learn is that the listeners do come back after they find you. Once they see that you're coming back, they find you. And I have to say also the Transhumanist-Party has been a huge help. I can't believe how many individuals have come forward and said that they appreciated me running, that they felt that the conservative voice was lacking, and I had people asking me if I'm staying involved after the election because they feel like it's a good conversation I can contribute, and I believe so too. I've learned that everyone, for the most part, has welcomed me with open arms, and even people I don't agree with that might be a little snarky or smart people are smart people. They don't like dumb questions, but not everything is a dumb question. So
no, there's never a dumb question. I find
depends on who you talk to. There's a couple on both sides that are but nonetheless, I want to say thank you to everyone out there that did support me. I did come into third place, which wasn't bad. I had the second place votes right behind Ben Zion, who had the most first and second place votes. Congratulations. And I had a very huge amount of third and fourth place votes, which means a lot of people resonated with me out of 9 candidates. I mean, I guess Ben and I were up against some pretty interesting people and some highly intelligent people, and what we were able to come out, everyone gained something out of it, I guess.
I characterize you from almost day one as a dark horse because you're extremely switched on. You have a media operation. You can get your head around talking points really quickly, and I think people do resonate with the conservative voice. Because the Transhumanist Party is supposed to take people in from the left to the right of the spectrum, all sides, and I do find the conservative side, it lacks a little, and there's misconceptions about the conservative voice as well, because I think Alex Jones has done a lot of sort of, if I can say, damage. It's not what I mean, but it's damage. It's damage, and it's not what I mean, but I'm going to use the word damage to the conservative voice, where he made anyone who's leans conservative sound like a kook, where you can't say stuff about the government or say stuff about Facebook without having that Alex Jones type tinge, and that's really bad, and because actually people are individuals, and you shouldn't have his face drawn right over your own when you speak with that tone.
Well, it's kind of one of those things. So when you're talking about Alex Jones, you're talking about my fam, the crew that I grew up with as far as a journalist. And, I think if it wasn't for Alex Jones, we wouldn't have as many libertarian conservatives at the same time. I know that his show is very sensationalized. He's loud and obnoxious. I will say at one point, maybe not so much anymore, but I would say up to 2015, before the whole Trump era, he had some of the best independent journalists out there. And if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't know about a lot of these technologies and these government abuses and the police state, globalization, Bohemian Grove, these think tanks. I tell you what, the guy is highly intelligent. He deserves to be on a platform right next to everyone else. And a lot of people actually don't look at him as crazy. I think that's the issue, is that the liberal media in general wants to make him seem crazy, but it's mostly because he's dismantling the government's corruption, whether it's conservative or liberal. And yes, now he's a Trump. He's like this guy on South Park that'd be walking around going, Trump, 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 Trump. And I don't appreciate that. He used to be centric and in the middle, but now it's, this, Trump that. And not that I don't, I'm pretty central. I don't like, all our presidents do good and bad things. And so I try to stay kind of neutral on the subject. So yeah, that's my opinion, Joe. So I'm going to plug him because I know the guy would stick up for my freedom of speech. And I'm going to have to say that the media and the news in America is much worse off without him. So.
Well, there you go. You heard it from Kriston Harris. What do you? All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Also, wait. One last thing.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Good night.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Kriston. You guys have been great. That was a great show. Lots
Thanks,
packed
guys.
in there. If you've just joined us, go back and watch it. It's fantastic.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet.
That's
Take a look
Alexa
at the help
telling you to
section
go to
in
bed.
your Alexa
All right,
app.
thank you, everybody. That's Detonation, where we're putting death out of business. If you check out the USTP, check out Ben Zion 2020, Kriston Harris over at Rundown Live. Check it all out. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Good night.
You guys
Lots of exciting shows coming up, guys. Thanks for doing this.